Rashid was born in a small village where life was not easy. His mother had died when he was very young, and his father worked as a daily laborer, earning just enough for them to survive. Rashid's clothes were always old, patched many times, by his father's rough hands. His shoes, if he had any, were torn at the front, and sometimes he had to walk barefoot on the dusty roads. While other children played carefree in the fields, Rashid often carried heavy buckets of water, collected firewood, or helped his father in the fields. The children of the rich families in the village never understood his struggles. They laughed at him when he passed by with his torn shirt and messy hair. Some of them even covered their noses when he walked close, whispering to each other, "Here comes the filthy boy." Among them was Amina, the daughter of the wealthy landlord. She had everything Rashid did not: new clothes, delicious food, and a comfortable home. But instead of showing kindness, she too mocked him, joining the other children when they called him names. Rashid would only lower his eyes and walk away silently. Life taught Rashid patience. He never raised his voice against those who insulted him. He knew words could hurt, but he also knew that anger would not feed his father or put food on their table. Instead, he worked harder every day. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, he would go to fetch water from the faraway well. Then he would help his father plow the fields under the hot sun. In the evenings, he took small jobs carrying goods for shopkeepers or helping old men in their farms, just so he could bring home a few coins. Even though his clothes were dirty and his hands rough, his heart was clean. Whenever he saw someone in trouble, he was the first to help. If a cart got stuck in the mud, Rashid would run to push it out. If a farmer lost his cow, Rashid would spend hours searching the fields to bring it back. The villagers noticed his kindness, but they also saw his poverty. Many felt pity for him, but few openly defended him when the landlord's children made fun of him. One day, while walking through the village square, Rashid carried a heavy basket of firewood on his back. The children laughed and pointed, saying, "Look at him, he looks like a donkey." Amina, standing among them, covered her mouth and giggled. Rashid's face turned red, but he kept walking. He did not want to show them his hurt. Deep inside, he wished he could have a normal life like them, but he accepted his reality without complaint. His father often told him, "Son, people may call you names, but remember, respect comes from honesty and hard work. Do not let their words break you." Rashid carried these words in his heart. Whenever he felt weak, he remembered his father's advice and stood stronger. As time passed, Rashid grew taller and stronger. He was no longer the thin little boy everyone mocked. But the memory of their insults still followed him. Some villagers started noticing that while many wealthy boys wasted their days in idleness, Rashid was the one who worked tirelessly. Slowly, a few people began to admire him, though the landlord's children, especially Amina, still looked down on him. There was one moment that stayed in the villagers' memory. It was a hot summer afternoon when a small child fell into the river while playing near the banks. The child's mother screamed for help, but no one dared to jump in. The water was strong and dangerous. Rashid, without thinking twice, threw off his sandals and leapt into the river. He fought the current and pulled the child out safely. The villagers clapped and praised his bravery, but Amina only rolled her eyes, saying, "He probably jumped, and because he is used to being dirty anyway." Rashid heard her words, but he did not reply. Deep inside, he wondered why her heart was so hard. Though life was unkind to him, Rashid found happiness in small things. At night, he sat under the open sky with his father, eating simple bread with onions or lentils. They shared stories, laughed quietly, and looked at the stars. Rashid dreamed of a future where he could earn enough to give his father a better life, maybe even build a small brick house instead of their mud hut. His dreams were simple, but his determination was strong. On the other side, Amina lived in a grand house with tall walls and servants who obeyed her every word. She never worried about food, clothes, or shelter. Yet, she often felt bored and restless. She did not realize that the boy she laughed at every day carried more strength and patience than any wealthy man she had met. Her world was full of comfort, while his world was full of struggle. The two lived side by side in the same village but were worlds apart in life and spirit. Years later, people would remember how everyone once called Rashid filthy. They would remember his torn clothes and the dust on his face. But they would also remember that behind that rough appearance was a young man with a pure heart. At that time, however, nobody could imagine that the same boy would one day be tied to the landlord's family in a way that would change everything. For now, Rashid was just the poor boy who carried firewood, fetched water, and worked hard while being mocked. He never guessed that the girl who laughed at him the loudest would one day be the one to share his life. Fate had already written a story that no one in the village could see yet. Time passed quickly, and the little boy everyone once called filthy slowly grew into a young man. Rashid's body became strong from years of hard work under the sun. His arms were muscular from carrying water and cutting wood, and his skin turned dark brown from the heat. He was no longer the thin, shy child who used to lower his head when insulted. Though his clothes were still simple, his face carried a quiet confidence that people could not ignore. The villagers began to notice him more and more. They saw how he worked honestly and never cheated anyone. If a farmer asked him to help in the field, Rashid worked with full dedication and took only the fair wage. If someone was in trouble, he was always the first to offer his hand. Over time, many villagers began to respect him, even though he was still poor. Children who once laughed at him now ran to him for help in carrying heavy things or fixing broken toys. Old women blessed him when he carried water for them. Rashid had won the heart of the common people without even trying. But while the villagers saw his goodness, the landlord's daughter, Amina, still carried her old arrogance. She remembered him as the boy she and her brothers had laughed at, and it was hard for her to see him in any other way. To her, he was still the poor, filthy boy with patched clothes, even though everyone else noticed his honesty and courage. The landlord, Amina's father, had grown old by then. His health was not as strong as before, and he worried about the future of his family. He had land, wealth, and property, but what troubled him most was his daughter. Amina was beautiful and intelligent, but her pride had kept her from accepting any marriage proposals. Many wealthy families had come with offers, but Amina always found an excuse to reject them. Sometimes she said the man was not handsome enough, sometimes that he was not rich enough, and sometimes she simply said she did not like him. The old landlord often sat on the veranda of his house, looking at the fields and thinking deeply. He knew his daughter could not live her whole life refusing every suitor. One day, while sitting in thought, he saw Rashid from a distance. The young man was guiding a group of villagers during the flood season. The heavy rains had caused the river to overflow, and the water had reached the farms and homes near the banks. Rashid was not afraid. He tied ropes, helped people move to safer ground, and even carried children on his shoulders through the water. He risked his own life to save animals, pulling goats and cows out of the muddy fields. The landlord watched this scene with great attention. He realized that Rashid was not like other young men of the village. While many ran away in fear, Rashid stood firm and strong. His heart was brave, and his hands were always ready to serve. For the first time, the landlord felt respect for the boy his own children had mocked all their lives. That evening, he called Amina to his side. She came wearing a beautiful dress, her face shining with pride as usual. The landlord spoke slowly but firmly. He told her that he had made an important decision about her future. Amina was curious, thinking he might have found another wealthy suitor. But when he said, "You will marry Rashid," her mouth fell open in shock. She could not believe what she had heard. "Father," she cried, her voice filled with disbelief. "How can you say such a thing? Rashid? That poor boy? The one who carries firewood and wears torn clothes? Everyone calls him filthy. How can I, the daughter of the landlord, marry someone like him?" Her father raised his hand to silence her. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority. "Enough, Amina. I have watched many men in this village, and none have shown me the courage and honesty that Rashid has. Wealth and clothes mean nothing when the heart is weak. Rashid may be poor, but his character is richer than gold. He will protect you, care for you, and give you the respect you deserve. My decision is final." Amina felt anger rise in her chest. She could not accept it. All her life she had looked down upon Rashid, laughing at him with her brothers. The thought of marrying him felt like a punishment. She tried to argue, saying she would rather remain unmarried than be tied to him. But her father did not change his mind. The landlord's word was law in the family. Amina's brothers were also shocked by the decision, but they respected their father too much to openly challenge him. Deep inside, some of them were angry, for they too had once mocked Rashid. Now, the same boy was about to enter their family, in a way they had never imagined. News of the landlord's decision spread quickly through the village. The villagers were surprised, yet many secretly admired the choice. They knew Rashid was poor, but they also knew he was kind, brave, and honest. Some even said the landlord was wise, for he had chosen a man with a pure heart over a man with only wealth. Still, many were curious about how Amina would react once the marriage truly happened. For Rashid, the news came as a storm. When the landlord's messenger told him about the decision, he stood frozen, unable to believe it. He had never dreamed of marrying someone like Amina, the rich landlord's daughter who had always despised him. His first thought was to refuse, but how could he go against the landlord's command? His father, though surprised, told him softly, "Son, perhaps this is God's will. Accept it with patience." And so, while Rashid accepted the news with humility, Amina's heart burned with pride and anger. She promised herself that if the marriage truly happened, she would never treat Rashid as her husband. She would make sure he remembered his place. She did not know that this very promise would one day turn into regret, as her life would slowly begin to change in ways she could not imagine. The days moved forward, and preparations began. The landlord had spoken, and no one dared to oppose him. What had once seemed impossible was now becoming reality. Amina, the proud daughter of the wealthy landlord, was about to marry Rashid, the boy she and her brothers had called filthy all their lives. The marriage between Amina and Rashid took place in the presence of the whole village. On the outside, it was a celebration. Drums were beaten, villagers gathered in colorful clothes, and food was served in large pots. People smiled, laughed, and whispered to one another about the unusual union. But inside, Amina's heart was burning. She sat in her bridal dress, covered with jewelry, her face hidden by a veil, and all she could think about was the humiliation she felt. For her, marrying Rashid was not a happy event, but a punishment she could not escape. Rashid, on the other hand, was filled with mixed feelings. He did not feel proud or triumphant as some men might have in his position. Instead, he felt nervous and humble. He knew Amina did not want this marriage. He knew her heart was filled with pride and anger. Yet he also knew that once the landlord had spoken, there was no turning back. He prayed silently, asking for patience and strength to face whatever came next. When the wedding ended and Amina entered Rashid's simple home for the first time, the difference between her old life and her new life hit her like a storm. She had grown up in a large house with tall walls, servants at her call, and every comfort she could dream of. Now she stood in a small mud house with a broken roof, uneven floors, and almost no furniture. The bed was made of rough ropes. The kitchen had clay pots instead of shiny utensils, and the air smelled of earth and smoke from the stove. Amina could not hide her disgust. She turned her face away and muttered under her breath, "This is where I'm supposed to live. This is worse than punishment." Rashid heard her words but said nothing. He knew it would take time for her to adjust. But deep down, he feared she might never accept this life. He tried his best to make her feel comfortable. He offered her water, prepared a small meal, and made sure she had a place to rest. But Amina refused to eat and refused to speak. She sat quietly, her face full of pride, her heart full of resentment. 3. Days that followed were not easy. Amina avoided Rashid as much as she could. She refused to cook, refused to help with household chores, and often reminded him that she had been forced into this marriage. Whenever Rashid tried to speak kindly, she answered with coldness. "Don't think this marriage makes you my equal," she told him one evening. "You will always remain what you are, a poor, filthy laborer. Nothing more. Her words were sharp, but Rashid did not reply harshly. He simply lowered his eyes and continued with his work. He spent his days in the fields plowing under the sun, earning just enough to feed them both. In the evenings, he returned tired, his clothes soaked in sweat. Yet he never complained. He placed food on the mat, invited her to eat, and ate quietly himself whether she joined him or not. The villagers soon noticed the situation. They saw how Amina walked through the streets with her head held high, ignoring Rashid and speaking to him with arrogance. They also saw how Rashid, instead of fighting back, treated her with patience and respect. Some shook their heads, saying the marriage would never work. Others whispered that maybe one day Amina would see his true worth. There were small moments, however, when the truth of Rashid's character shone so brightly that even Amina could not ignore it. One afternoon, while Amina was fetching water, reluctantly from the village well, she slipped on the wet stones and nearly fell into the deep water. Before anyone else could react, Rashid, who had been working nearby, rushed to her side and pulled her back to safety. She was shaken, but instead of thanking him, she turned her face away and muttered, "I didn't need your help." Rashid only nodded and walked away silently. But deep inside, a small crack appeared in her pride. Another time, when Amina fell sick with fever, Rashid spent the whole night awake, placing wet cloths on her forehead, bringing medicine from the village, and sitting beside her until her breathing became calm. Amina pretended to be asleep, but she could feel his gentle hands and hear his worried sighs. For the first time, she wondered why a man she had insulted so much still cared for her with such kindness. Still, her transformation did not come quickly. Most days, her pride took over again. She often compared her life in Rashid's home to the luxury she once had. She missed the servants, the rich food, the soft bed, and the decorated rooms. Why should I live like this? She asked herself, again and again. Why should I suffer in poverty when I could have had everything? These thoughts made her treat Rashid coldly, even when her heart began to notice his goodness. Rashid's patience, however, never ended. His father's advice still echoed in his mind. Respect comes from honesty and hard work. He believed that if he continued to be patient and kind, one day Amina would understand. He did not force her to change, nor did he complain about her behavior. He simply lived as he always had, honest, hard-working, and humble. The villagers began to admire him even more. They said to one another, "Look at Rashid. Even after all the insults, he still treats his wife with love. He does not shout. He does not raise his hand. He does not show anger. Such a man is rare." Slowly, some of these words reached Amina's ears. Though she did not admit it, she began to feel uneasy inside. She wondered if maybe she had been wrong about him all along. But pride is a heavy chain, and Amina was not yet ready to break it. She continued to live in bitterness, even as small seeds of doubt grew in her heart. Rashid remained silent, carrying the weight of the household on his shoulders, never complaining, never giving up. The bitter beginning of their marriage was like a stormy night, full of thunder and darkness. But beyond that storm, a new dawn was waiting, one that neither Amina nor Rashid could yet see. "Are the stars?" Amina spoke softly, her voice trembling. "I used to think you were beneath me," she admitted. "I used to believe I was too good for you. But now I see that I was blind. You are better than anyone I have ever known. I am sorry for the way I treated you." Rashid looked at her, his eyes gentle, and replied, "The past does not matter. What matters is what we choose today." His words touched her deeply. She realized that Rashid had never held anger against her, even though she had insulted him countless times. His patience was greater than she could understand. From that day, Amina changed completely. She no longer carried the arrogance of the landlord's daughter. Instead, she carried respect for the man who had shown her what true strength and kindness meant. She began to walk beside him, not behind him, and for the first time she felt proud, not of wealth, not of status, but of the man she had once called filthy. The transformation of her heart was complete. What once seemed like a punishment now felt like a blessing. The girl who had mocked Rashid now looked at him with admiration, and the man who had suffered her insults finally saw the respect he had always quietly deserved. With time, the bond between Amina and Rashid grew stronger. Amina no longer saw him as the boy she had once mocked. Instead, she saw a man whose heart was pure and whose soul was gentle. The pride that had once filled her days was replaced with admiration and love. She began to notice the countless small things he did every day, how he woke up before dawn to fetch water, how he worked tirelessly in the fields, how he helped neighbors without expecting anything in return. She also noticed how he treated her now, with patience, kindness, and respect. He never demanded anything from her, never raised his voice, never made her feel small. Instead, he treated her as an equal partner in life, sharing the burdens and joys of their simple home. Amina realized that all the wealth in the world could never buy the peace and happiness she now felt in her husband's presence. Rashid, for his part, never changed his ways. He continued to work hard, care for others, and remain humble. But now Amina stood beside him. She helped him with household chores, spoke to him kindly, and even joined him in helping the villagers. Together they became a team, respected and loved by everyone in the community. The villagers noticed the transformation in both of them. The girl who had once scorned Rashid now walked proudly with him, her smile gentle and genuine. The man they had once pitied now stood tall, admired not just for his strength but for his character. Amina's brothers, who had mocked Rashid in the past, could not hide their surprise. They watched as Rashid helped their father with village affairs, spoke wisely to the villagers, and carried himself with dignity. They realized that the man they had looked down upon had become someone they could respect. Slowly, their laughter turned to nods of approval. They began to treat Rashid differently, understanding that wealth was temporary, but character was forever. Life in the village began to change as well. The example set by Rashid and Amina inspired others. People started valuing honesty, kindness, and humility more than wealth and appearance. Children who had once laughed at poor boys learned to respect everyone, regardless of their status. Farmers and laborers found hope, seeing that a simple man could gain respect and love through his actions and heart. The village felt more united, more compassionate, and more understanding because of Rashid and the woman who had learned to see him for who he truly was. In their home, Amina and Rashid built a life filled with small joys. They planted a vegetable garden together, and Amina learned to cook simple meals with love. Rashid would sometimes bring home small gifts he could afford, a basket of fresh fruit, a handmade tool for her cooking, or a flower from the field. These small acts, simple as they were, filled their hearts with happiness. They laughed together, shared stories, and found comfort in each other's company. Amina often reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered how she had mocked Rashid, how she had refused to accept him, and how her pride had blinded her to his true worth. She realized that life had taught her a valuable lesson, that appearances could be deceiving, and true wealth was not measured in gold or clothes, but in the strength, kindness, and honesty of a person's heart. Rashid never sought recognition, but he could not help but feel content seeing the love and respect of the woman he cared for and the approval of the villagers. He often thought back to the days when people called him filthy. He remembered the loneliness, the insults, and the struggles. But now all of that had been transformed into something meaningful, a life of love, respect, and shared joy. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Amina and Rashid sat together outside their home. The sky glowed in warm colors, and a gentle breeze passed through the village. Amina leaned her head on Rashid's shoulder and whispered, "I am proud to be your wife. I have learned so much from you. You have taught me that true strength is in kindness and patience, not in wealth or pride." Rashid smiled, placing his arm around her. "And I have learned from you too," he said softly. "I have learned that even the proudest heart can change when it sees love and honesty. We have both grown together." Their life continued, full of simple but meaningful moments. They celebrated small victories, helped villagers in need, and supported each other through every challenge. The village looked at them not just as a couple, but as an example of how respect, love, and patience could change lives. Years later, when people talked about Rashid and Amina, they no longer spoke of a filthy boy or a proud girl. They spoke of a man whose heart was pure and a woman whose mind and heart had opened to understanding and love. They spoke of a life built on honesty, patience, and respect. A life that proved that true wealth is not in money, but in character and love. Amina often told young girls in the village stories of how she once looked down on Rashid and how she had learned to see the truth. She encouraged them to respect everyone, no matter their background, and to value kindness and honesty above all. Rashid quietly continued his work, never seeking praise but happy to see his life and actions inspiring others. The story of Rashid and Amina became a lesson for generations. It showed that life could surprise anyone, that love and respect could grow even where pride and hatred once lived, and that a pure heart could change the world. Not through wealth or power, but through simple, honest actions. In the end, Amina and Rashid lived a life of quiet happiness. Their house was simple, their meals humble, but their hearts were full. They laughed, worked, helped others, and loved each other deeply. The girl who had once scorned the boy now walked beside him with pride and love, and the boy who had once been called filthy had become a man of honor and respect. The village remembered them as a true example of how patience, kindness, and humility could overcome pride, arrogance, and misunderstanding. And in every corner of the village, children and adults alike whispered the story, that love and respect are earned through character, not by wealth or appearances, and that sometimes the person we least expect can change our lives forever.